Welcome to the Teacher's Pep Rally. If you missed our last 2 seasons, please go back and check it out. Now let's kick off season 3. Our guest today shares a passion with us, and that is the well-being of our students. She's a college instructor teaching psychology courses and freshman seminars. She's a student and parent coach who helps them navigate the high pressure, high stakes achievement, academic environments. And she's the author of The Disintegrating Student, Struggling But Smart, Falling Apart, and How to Turn It Around. Please welcome to the Teacher's Pep Rally, Dr. Jeannine Jannot.
Woohoo! Dr. Jannot!
Yay!
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Welcome. We're so excited for many reasons that you're here. This book has been something that's been talked about a lot in my community. So to have you here, it's an honor and a privilege. And then on top of that, we're just kind of all getting back to it and being together at the Teacher's Pep Rally. So warm feelings all around.
Yes.
Great to be a part of it.
Good. I'm glad that you're here. All right. So here's the first thing I want to ask you. How did you start this journey to be an advocate for student mental health and well-being? How did this happen?
I had kids. That's the short answer. The longer answer is about 10 years ago, I took a job teaching college. And at the time, my youngest was in elementary school, my middle daughter was in middle school, and my oldest was in high school. And then I was teaching college. And so I had this amazing bird's eye view of the whole process. And it really freaked me out a little bit because I was starting to see, I saw the end result, and I had these college students who I was just so surprised at how overwhelmed they were, how unprepared they were for the responsibilities, how lacking in skills and the anxiety. So that was not good. And then clearly I was seeing it in middle school and high school and with my children and their friends. And what really concerned me was it was starting to happen in the elementary grades, where I was seeing so many kids having anxiety, having stomach issues around school avoidance. And I kind of just got on a mission to do something, anything. And it basically translated into me starting the Balanced Student, where I coach students and parents, and I'm just trying to figure out, what it is they need to, show up as their best selves as students. And through that was the whole kind of impetus behind me ending up having to write a book, which I never intended. Again, I was just having kids. And then all this kind of came out of that. What I realized was these kids who were showing up for coaching weren't the kids I was expecting to show up for coaching. They were really high achieving kids who all of a sudden hit a wall and just started to fall apart. And so that's how the Disintegrating Student came about.
Yeah, that's interesting. Can you tell us about this term, the disintegrating student, what that means to you and what it means in the book, just in like a little nutshell before we get really digging deep into the conversation?
Absolutely. It's just a term that I coined because these kids were falling apart. And so these are the kids, typically pretty high achieving kids. A lot of them identified as gifted, many with some neuroatypical things going on as well. So executive functioning weaknesses, learning disabilities as well, but high achieving. They're the kids who in elementary school just kind of showed up, got their work done in class or on the bus, never studied, always got good grades, very easy, smooth student experience until they hit a wall. So there's a rigor tipping point where a lot of students, if they don't develop the skills and strategies and behaviors that support the academic rigor that comes their way, which is coming their way earlier and earlier, then that's where they start to fall apart. And so that's the Disintegrating Student kind of in a nutshell.
Wow. Yeah, you're saying a lot there.
Exactly.
So I'm at the college level as you are, and I teach a FYS, a first year seminar course to the freshmen coming in. And, you're right. We've been noticing this. So you said you started that 10 years ago, you began teaching, and that's when you really started to notice this?
Yes.
Firsthand, you started to notice
Firsthand.
this. But do you think it's been going on longer?
Yes. I imagine it has, because I think the kind of this high stakes, high pressure achievement culture has been forming and gaining ground for the last 3 decades.
Wow.
So I don't
Wow.
think it's anything new, but I think that's why I wrote the book, because I feel like it's not just a student thing. It's not like we go in and we fix these kids. It's a much bigger issue. I mean, it's how students show up to school. It's how teachers are showing up to educate our kids. It's how parents are showing up to parent. And it all has to do with what are the expectations around education and achievement. And right now it's very data driven. It's very, success equals data points. It equals, your GPA, your grades, your SAT, ACT scores. And it's turning our students into, they're very check the box oriented. Like, I just need to do this thing to get the next data point. And I just have felt like the joy of learning has, been going away over all these years, to the point where this is just what's expected. They just know I show up, I do this to get the next thing.
Yeah, I certainly would not probably enjoy, if I think about it, being a student in a younger student, K through 12, in a classroom, because I was such the kid that loved to play in a sandbox.
Right.
I was the kid that loved to try to give me a minute to figure it out. Like, I'm okay if I get it wrong, as long as you're cool with me finding time to figure out. Do you think that's part of that balance that maybe we've lost a little bit in the schools?
We have, because what you just described is a growth mindset. So yes. You want to get out there, you want to try things, you want some challenge, you want to make mistakes and learn from it. And you don't feel restricted, like I've got this place where I'm going to max out. And we have created an environment for our children where we're pumping out a lot of fixed mindset students. So they are very much afraid of the rigor and the challenge, and they start to self-handicap. And they don't ask for help, because smart kids don't ask for help. They don't like to put effort in, because smart kids don't have to. They've spent their whole life not having to try very hard, and all of a sudden, oh, okay. And then when they realize not only is it going to take some effort and kind of putting yourself out there, it's also, you're likely to make a mistake and fail a few times. And that in their minds becomes something that's really unacceptable, because they have internalized that they're a smart kid. And when they're starting to get feedback that maybe you're not so smart, that just shuts them down, and their self-esteem is what really gets negatively impacted.
So I equate that with persistence too. And I teach in the sciences side, and we just had this conversation. That's why I'm so happy we're here tonight. With persistence being, especially during, I guess we could talk about COVID and the effects of COVID, but maybe that's too broad of a topic. But we start to see these students who have been passed through junior, senior year in the math and the sciences to some degree, for whatever reasons. Maybe the online education that we've been delivering hasn't been the best, but now all of a sudden they're wanting to pursue an engineering or a biology or a science degree or whatever. And then they get into these spaces, and all of a sudden they find out, I'm not going to get the A. I'm going to get the B or the B minus, or maybe the C plus. And then they flail open and they want to move into the liberal arts. Nothing against the liberal arts and the folks who are out there are listening to this who are the liberal arts majors, but they came in with a goal in mind, and that was to graduate with an engineering degree or a science degree. And then all of a sudden now that persistence, that ability to battle through is not as strong as what I remember definitely growing up. And then also what I've seen, that's the disintegration that I've seen, is that ability to kind of work through this and learn and embrace the joy of learning, right? Yeah, you said the joy of learning. That's just a great concept in itself. But you're right, that persistence just seems to be not there. And then they're so quick to say, oh, I quit. And then they move along. Even the high performing students are doing that. And we're really trying to figure out how do we reel them back in and kind of reorient them. So I think that's where your book really becomes helpful.
Yeah, and they don't have any practice at that. So
None.
We're depriving them of the opportunity to learn that way. And so, yeah, I think college is a huge challenge for a lot of these kids. And sometimes that disintegration, that rigor tipping point actually happens in college. So these kids have made it all the way through high school, and they go off and they get that first C. Right. And they completely, talk about the mental health crisis on campuses. A lot of it's driven by kind of garden variety stressors like getting a bad grade, having a conflict with a roommate, where these kids aren't as equipped as they probably should be and need to be when they're off living on their own like that.
Can you imagine? My wheels are turning. I don't know where to start. So I think it's really interesting, and I love Dr. Jannot, is it?
Yes.
Is that how I say it, Jannot? Because as an elementary teacher, I remember seeing this check the box. This kid has to have an A as early as second grade. And so they get into the gifted program around that time, and then they're checking the boxes. And then if they get a B, the parent comes and creates a sandstorm in the front office, which pressures the principal, which pressures the teacher to change the B to an A just so that we keep the peace. Mm-hmm. And Dr. J, I'm the one of the group that likes to talk about the elephant in the room, because I've seen that in my practice for years, where we just want to get the parent out of our hair, right? And so we just really change the grade. And we've done them a disservice. And I agree with you 100%. I think this has been the perfect storm waiting. I almost want us to stop using COVID as an excuse. I think COVID has tipped us all over, right? It
Absolutely.
has tipped us all over. However, these practices of not building resilience is really we've done a disservice. And I mean, we, the community, those of us in education, have done our students a disservice. So I applaud your courage in writing the book and trying to find solution, because we're in some critical times.
We are, and your point is so well taken, but I've gone through the blame game on every front that I could think of. And unfortunately, there's just a ton of blame to go around. But the problem is there really is no blame, because everybody involved in educating our kids is incredibly well-intentioned. Nobody has the agenda of like, let's mess our kids up. Let's get them all in a fixed mindset and stress them out. This has been, we're all responding to the culture, and it's been a very top-down process as to how we got here. So we've started with, kind of society at large, which is driven largely, by policies in government and politicians and things like that. And that goes down to then the corporations. And then you've got the colleges responding to the job market. Who do these employers want? Who do we need to crank out here? And then the high schools are responding to the colleges, what they need. And then the administrators are responding to that, and the teachers are responding to what the administrators say. And then you've got students and parents down here at the bottom. And it needs to be 100% flipped on its head. This needs to be bottom up. It's the students, the teachers, and the parents who know what our kids need from an education standpoint. And teachers, they're the experts. And I feel like all they get is told what to do and how to do it. And here's a new thing to try. And I just wish we would trust our teachers and let them be driving practice policy and programs.
Oh my gosh, I think we found our ambassador for teachers right here.
Right here. That's it.
Can you feel my hug, Dr. J?
Yep.
Can you feel my hug?
Yes, hug.
This is wonderful. And I am so ready to flip it upside down. We've got to make some serious changes. And I hope between you and Letitia in saying that now's the time, I hope that happens. So let's think of some things that we can do now. What are some things we have control over? And I think, Dr. Jannot, I had mentioned that, you do a great job of sharing tips for parents. And so if we'll mention where people can find you at the end of this, but on your website, you tend to give some tips for parents that can help them build better two-way communication. Can you give us a couple of things that we can do as parents, and maybe teachers could follow the same thing about having better two-way communication, so we really get tapped into what these kids are feeling and going through?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I'm glad you mentioned the teacher part, because the advice goes both ways. So any adults in our kids' lives, the advice that I would start with is so simple and basic that it almost feels, I think, especially like to a parent, like we're not doing enough, like we're not parenting if this is the advice we follow. But the first thing and the most important thing, and the thing that buffers our kids and is so protective, is we show up as warm, supportive adults in their life. I mean, it's so simple, but that is the thing that's going to buffer them from all this adversity that they're experiencing, whether it's COVID related, school related, socially related with their peers. They need to have someone, at least one person they can count on who loves them, supports them, and gives them all that good stuff, accepts them. The next thing kind of comes out of that is that, I think because we're in this culture of like worrying about the next check the box kind of thing, especially parents, we tend to talk to our kids an awful lot about school. Have you done this? What'd you get on that test? I mean, it's the first thing we say to them, and we're offloading our anxiety onto them. And it just makes it worse for them. So when we're saying you need to do this thing, the more we do that, the less likely they are to actually follow through. So our instinct is to address our stress, and then we think we're helping them by reminding them. But what our kids actually need is for us to zip it and listen and just hear what they're trying. They will tell us what they need. And if we listen with empathy, so that means like kind of listening from their, how old are you? You 12 years old? You're thinking with a 12-year-old brain here, and you're upset about this thing that happened at lunch. And yeah, I know your past history with these friends. That's the way we need to listen to them, not with the 57-year-old brain going, well, I know what you need to do. Didn't you just, but that's so easy to do because we're problem solvers and we're trying to help, but we need to listen and then just reflect back what we're hearing and kind of get the validation. Yeah, I was really frustrated that she did that. And that is, even though we didn't solve a problem, that's not what our kid actually wanted us to do. They wanted us to just listen to them because we're that safe person. So that would be a huge thing to kind of avoid trying to solve the problems. And the last thing I would say that I think is really, really helpful, because this is a hard one, and it is to prioritize our relationship with our kids over the academic piece. Because the academic piece, which is important, I'm not trying to downplay it at all, it is never going to be what it should be if we don't have the relationship in place. We've just got to be there for our kids, and we've got to tell them, you matter to me for you, not because of your grade, not because of the number of APs you're taking, not because of, how well you did on the SAT, ACT, not because you're in the gifted program, but because you are uniquely you. And that is like the best thing ever. And that's just us kind of really just paying attention to what comes out of our mouth that our kids are interpreting as like, I think you care more about my grades than me. And it's like, oh, I can see why you think that. Not true, but I can see why you think it.
Yeah, it's those messages we give out that we don't even realize we're doing.
Yeah. And it's well-intentioned.
But one of the things that's interesting about that is, so you're saying from the parent's perspective that they're sending this message, and then you start to don't you have to take a step back a little bit and say, why does the parent have that message? Like what has happened to them that's now projecting that? And I kind of share that when I do orientation with parents. So I speak to the parents when they're coming into the student orientation process. So they split the parents off from the students. And I kind of throw out a reflective question where I say, did our parents screw up that bad that we have to really mess this system up? Because that's what it feels like we've done. We've felt like we've all had to become these overbearing parents where we're imposing these things that weren't imposed on us. So where did that come from? Are we that bad off that we have to do that?
It's part of this culture that it's just been kind of baked in the cake over probably the last 20 years, that piece of it, where we've just become more protective of our children. A good parent keeps track of this stuff. A good parent makes sure their kid's safe, knows where their kid is, puts their kid in all the right things, make sure that they go to a good school, make sure that they get good grades, make sure they get in a good college. And we're identifying good parenting by those kinds of standards. And I think we've just forgotten, we're just supposed to really show up and be there and love them, feed them, that kind of stuff, versus managing their lives out a decade or two. I mean, that seems unreasonable, really, when you think about it. It's like when kids are little, it's like we're talking about what college they're going to go to. I don't think it came up in my family until I was maybe a freshman or sophomore.
No. Yeah. Yeah.
It just wasn't a thing we talked about. I mean, I went to college or I didn't go to college.
Yep. That's right. It's interesting.
Almost like we're fast forwarding their youth is what I imagine, right? Why are we already thinking about what they're going to do when they get older? Let's just enjoy the moment now. Pete, I'm curious from you. I keep thinking about Pete because he's, you know, in elementary school right now. And are you seeing some of this even with the little ones?
There is so much stress and pressure. This book's amazing. I was reading it and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was me in high school. I wish I knew. I was, oh, this makes sense. So I'm a music teacher, and really music didn't happen very much last year, and it's happening to a certain degree this year. And I've really changed how I'm teaching, what I'm teaching. It's been, and since we started the podcast, it's been about the connecting. It's been about the process over the result. It's been about, let's get in there and make noise before we can make music. I can't expect them to recognize Mozart if they've never banged on a drum. So I'm all about the playing, and I've really changed. I kind of gone off the rails, and I'm not using the curriculum that's kind of shoved down my throat, and I'm kind of making up my own. And I'm the kids are eating this up this year. They're getting so much into it. We had our first unit quiz today, and it was a quiz that I've never attempted before. It was one I've made up. It wasn't standard. It wasn't from a music curriculum or a music book, and it had drawing in it. It had making a rhythm and then asking your neighbor to play it, and then evaluating your neighbor, and and then, can you meet me at the piano and show me how to do this chord? And I'm like, last year, if I was following the curriculum, or the year before, we wouldn't be here yet. And these are kids that didn't have it. So on the way home from school, I was thinking, why are we doing so great? And it's because I think I've lightened up. I think we pulled back and we just let it play a little, let things simmer a little. My wife gets mad at me when I come home. I'm trying to help dinner, and I'm boiling water, and she says, it's not a full boil. Don't put the pasta in till it's a full boil. So we're letting that simmer get to a full boil in the classroom. And I've told them since day one of this whole COVID thing, I said, my priority is your safety. Number 2 is, gosh, I just want to spark a smile. And number 3, if we can make music, hell yeah, that's a great day. And that's what I've been doing. And I think it's really caught on with the kids. I'm hearing about problems in other classrooms that are not existing in music. And I think it's because of this approach, and reading your book totally reinforced it, because I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing. It really reinforced
you made
it.
learning fun for them.
It's
that's
gotta
what
be.
It sounds like.
It's called enrichment.
You made a quiz fun.
Yeah.
I would have liked to take that quiz.
Yeah, it was such a good time, and they formed their own bands this year. They're forming their own bands. We're doing modern band method. They're either learning drum, piano, keys, bass. I'm not doing recorder. I'm not doing xylophone. I'm doing stuff relevant to them, and we're doing songs that are popular now. And then if I can throw in something from the past, great. But it doesn't all have to be a dead white composer for it to be substance. So are we gonna cut this out? I don't know. That's okay.
No, we're not. That was perfect.
but they're eating it up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are learning chords, you're learning this and that. And today, part of the quiz was they had to make the logo for their band. And then I'm going to work with the art teacher, where they're going to start making this logo on their t-shirt, and then they're going to wear it to school on those days. And
I love it.
We're making the connection. So I'm totally on board with the message of your book. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Just make sure you don't make them get tattoos of their logos.
No tattoos.
Are great. Tattoos, not great.
That's 5th grade. That's the graduation.
That's 5th grade. Yeah, that's next year.
So I love hearing that, Pete, so much. And one fact I wrote, and it's kind of making me think of what Pete just said, and then going all the way up to Fred, who's and you, Dr. Jannot, in the college area. When I was reading your book, I made a note. So I'm going to kind of read from my notes. Sorry, let me put on my nerd glasses. I wrote down, during your research and extensive study, you found interesting facts about the adolescent brain. And so I wrote down that we used to say that the range was 13 to 19, but changes start earlier at age 12 in some cases. And I see that with some of the kids in my family. And then these changes, along with expectations set by society, show adolescence can occur all the way to age 25. So
Yes.
what does this mean for parents? And what does this also mean for teachers and the education system to recognize this in schools?
I think everybody who works with these kids really would benefit from understanding the awesomeness and the craziness of this adolescent brain that is starting earlier than we ever knew. So the biggest thing to take away is that this period of adolescent brain development, so really from about the age of 10 to 25, so it's about a 15-year span really, where these changes are starting to happen or working their way through, is only rivaled by birth to 3. So from birth to 3, the brain is incredibly kind of spongy. So it absorbs a ton of information. It's making, I mean, think of the difference between a newborn and a 3-year-old. A whole bunch of stuff happens and the brain is responsible for that. So we didn't really realize that the adolescent brain goes through a second period of this kind of spongy brain. And, this is what's so tragic about our kids sort of having this fixed mindset and checking the box mentality around school is they're wasting this incredibly spongy brain that just wants to learn and experiment and take risks and make mistakes because it can really benefit from it. So that's one thing I think is really important. And then understanding what's happening with the brain around sleep as well during adolescence, because I think, we see a lot of, I remember I would try to count how many students are half awake in class, and I feel bad for them because you see those heavy eyes, and so our kids are incredibly sleep deprived. And a lot of that has to do with brain development and melatonin being produced later and them having to get up earlier. And, not to get too off the topic, but I've been hearing about this term lately and a lot. So I looked it up. Revenge bedtime procrastination. Have you guys heard of that?
No, tell me more.
Okay, so revenge bedtime, because I was like, that sounds like something that would interest me. So this is according to the Sleep Foundation, which is the kind of official National Sleep Foundation that sets our standards for sleep. So revenge bedtime procrastination describes the decision to sacrifice sleep for leisure time that is driven by a daily schedule that lacks free time.
Oh
so how many adults fall into that category? But
I literally had a colleague today in a meeting tell me she didn't call it this, but that's definitely what she was describing to me today. And she's like, why do I keep doing this? I'm so tired, right? So I'm thinking of kids, how easy that is if adults are doing it. You're so tired,
they're
but at night,
doing it.
Yes.
They are so doing it. Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons our kids are, and that speaks to do our kids have a balanced schedule? A lot of them don't. They're unreasonably scheduled.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what Fred was asking earlier, is why now we seem to see it more. I mean, it was there before, and I almost wonder if it's the binge watching, it's the social media, it's the gaming, it's all these things that are adding to, I need more time in my day to fit those things in. Because like you said, Dr. Jannot, there's just not enough of balance. If we're doing too much schooling and too much extracurricular activities, because we feel like we got to have those on our resumes to get into college, right? When's the time for kids to just be kids, or adults to just have alone time?
Right. And the adolescent brain too is also very sensitive to dopamine. So dopamine is the chemical in the brain that kind of is associated with pleasure. So every time our phone pings or does something for us, we're getting a little shot of dopamine, and they get their brains are just, again, very, very spongy, and they learn that kind of, they actually crave that dopamine hit a lot more than a more mature brain would. So there's a lot of things going on in the adolescent brain that make their behavior more like, oh, I get that. this all kind of makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know if I brought this up before. I'm going to do my nerdy lesson plan thing. When I was teaching Brave New World, and if you've read it, it's this dystopia, and they gave people drugs so they didn't have to ever worry about anything, no anxiety. It was actually a form of control. So I used to use the phone as an example of our soma, of our way of, being addicted to something, but also using it to kind of pass the time, or not really realize that things are happening and going by, and we're ignoring them. So that just kind of made me think about that. And that was one way to relate to the kids, because it made them think about, oh yeah, maybe I am kind of addicted to that pleasure of whenever I hear something, or I'm afraid I'm going to miss out on something on my phone if I'm not looking at it every 5 seconds. Right.
Right. And they have I think we all have a low tolerance for boredom. And unfortunately, boredom, or not unfortunately, but considering we're trying to fill all of our time and we're not getting that downtime, that's where creativity happens.
Yes.
We need those dead spots of like nothing, no sensory information coming in. We're just walking, we're just sitting. And students will tell me, oh no, don't make me. I mean, it's they act like it's torture, which is a little concerning because we need creativity.
You do. And you're right, that boredom piece is so key. And then as you're saying all this, I can't help but think about like the culture around the student, around the teacher, around the parents, and the school. Like, so you're talking about or Aaron, you're just talking about the resume and getting to sports and having that jam-packed schedule. But then like that's all changing too, as far as community. Like community is also disintegrating, because everybody, I look at it from one perspective of community baseball. So there was a time growing up where you had tons of kids participating in community baseball. And all of a sudden now what we're seeing is travel teams. So people pay to play and they go, but they're not connected to one another. They just go and go. But in the meantime, you saw that place where people would gather and parents would, rake the dirt together and rebuild the field together. And they would be different politically, and they'd be different socially and culturally and religiously, but they would all be getting together and sharing a common bond. And even that starts to dissipate, which I think kind of adds to this whole mentality of that we're not talking to each other. Like we don't know, we have no sense that what we might be doing is wrong, because we're just all in this one tunnel. And that's kind of goes back to that dystopian view, I guess, Aaron, is like, we're like lemmings right now, kind of marching down, thinking that this is the right way to go. But in the meantime, we're all going off the cliff.
We're alone in a group.
We're more connected than ever and more alone than ever.
A lot of isolation. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So Fred, I'm glad you brought up kind of this idea of growing up and how it was for you or for us and for our audience. So I'm curious, Dr. Jannot, is there a story from your childhood, a teacher, a mentor, or a coach maybe, that inspired you, or someone that you were able to look up to? Because we want to kind of highlight some of the positive relationships that people have as they're growing up. So tell us a story.
Well, to have had a coach, I would have had to be at all athletic, which I was not. So when I think back to my childhood, there's one teacher, and I can't even say exactly why this teacher has stuck in my head all these years, 3rd grade. So a long, long time ago. But what I remember about her is kind of that stuff I was talking about, that I felt very connected to her. I felt like she cared about me. I felt like she saw me, and she used to read stories. So what I remember most about her classroom is she'd start every class with reading stories. And there was one, I had to look it up because it was, it had "The Goblin Will Get You If You Don't Watch Out" in it. And she would say it with this like funny, like voice. And I looked it up. It's called "The Little Orphan Annie" poem, I think. And it's written, it's an old poem, so it's written funny, and she just delivered it amazingly. And I just remember thinking she was like so awesome. She was like going to the movies, is how I felt about it. I was entertained, I learned something. And I think that piece for me, because I didn't like to be told what to do. I was one of those kids. Like if you acted like you were all in control of me, I don't think so. So she definitely wasn't one of those teachers. I think she saw me for me and valued me, or at least that's how I felt. And
And
that's
talk
the one
about
I remember the most.
That's awesome. Talk about the creativity, because I imagine that meant that as she's telling the story and using the voices, you were able to make your own pictures in your head of what that looked like. So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
I love that story.
Can I ask a
Here's
question?
the moment where we
Oh.
do some takeaways. So at the end of our conversation, even though I hate to end it, I feel like I could talk to you all evening. We're going to pull a takeaway or something that was like an aha moment for us. And then if it's okay, maybe something for you, a last word or some kind of takeaway that you'd like to end the conversation with as our guest. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay. So normally I go with Fred first, but I might switch it up and go with Pete.
Zing!
Believe in the joy of learning, like I was talking about. Get out there, try, explore, play, and make mistakes. Do a Bob Ross, make happy little mistakes.
Nice.
I agree with that.
How about you, Letitia?
Oh, so many.
That's fine. You got time. Go
But
ahead.
you
Girl.
know, I love this idea of zipping it, listening with empathy.
Mm.
And to be quite honest, you know, my own daughter said that to me. You know, the reason why I don't share is because you do this and you go from 0 to 100. And so you're not making it, you know, conducive to me sharing. And that is a powerful, powerful lesson. Now we're close as two peas in a pod, because even though she's going to be 29 this month, I've learned how to zip it. God gave me one mouth and two ears. So listen more, talk less. And so that's the advice. And I know as parents, it's hard to do less talking and more listening. But at the end, I think it's good for everybody, to be quite honest. Takes
Maybe
the load
that'll
off the parent too.
Maybe that'll be our next shirt. Just zip it.
Just zip it.
Zip it.
And you know, I need to work on it. But as you were saying that, Letitia, I wrote, we used to say caring is sharing, but maybe we should change it to something like loving is listening. Like, doesn't really rhyme, but
Ooh.
I don't know, something like that.
I like it.
Hashtag that.
How about you, Fred?
So I agree. Well, they stole mine, but the thing was, I'm gonna shift it in two ways. I like the concept of full boil that Pete brought up about the pasta. No, I really liked what you said, and it's actually a continuation of where we left off from last year, and I think it's fantastic you brought up, and I think it needs to be continued, and that is warm, supportive, and authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there was a theme towards the end of our season last season, and that allowed us to say, what are we going to carry forward into this new teaching year? And I think the one thing that's been the common comment from so many teachers that I've talked to, professors, K through 12, whatever, and that's authenticity. Because of everything you just said tonight, I think being our authentic self helps us. Well, we lower a barrier, they see we lower our barrier, and then that starts to open up a better two-way communication.
Free.
Nice, Fred. So I have two. My first one is, I didn't realize, but I think Jack Black's character in School of Rock was based on Pete.
I love that movie. I love that show.
I do too. And
that.
you are even better than that. I loved hearing that story.
Thank you.
My real takeaway, I wrote down a couple things, but I'm going to go with this one. And guys, even though we're the teachers pep rally, the takeaway today, school is not everything.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. But we talked about this, right? We always say human connections. It's the connections. It's the connections. But it just was, I liked the way, Dr. Jannot, that you said this and how you brought up, especially at home, that we bring up school a lot. And so sometimes we need to think about our message. And if we're putting that much anxiety on them about school, then no wonder that's all that they think about and worry about. So school is not everything.
Beautiful.
All right. How about you, Dr. Jannot? It's your opportunity. You get the final word here.
So I live and breathe this stuff, and I have been for a long time. And I kind of suck at it. So I say that because I think a lot of times people read the book or, hear me talk or come to a parent talk and they feel bad. Like, oh, I've been doing this wrong, or I wish I hadn't. And I just don't feel like there's a lot of room for regret here. I feel like parenting is really, really hard. Teaching is really, really hard. And all the stuff we've talked about is not easy, and no one is going to be perfect at it. And I think it's just so important to give ourselves grace in this space and say, you're showing up, you're caring, you're asking, people are listening to this podcast. That makes you a rock star teacher, parent. I don't care who you are. That's amazing, because we want to help our kids. So perfection is not the goal here. This is just the process and trying our best. And our kids will notice that and they'll appreciate it.
Excellent.
Amazing. Well, we're so thankful that you came on here. You're our first guest of the new season. I do want to mention to everyone that Dr. Jannot has given us a signed copy of the Disintegrating Student. So we want to gift that out to someone in the Teachers Pep Rally. So here's what I'm thinking, Fred. I'm thinking we send people to our Facebook page, the Teachers Pep Rally podcast, and they tell us their takeaway from this episode.
I think that's a great idea.
And then what we'll do is we'll take all the names in the comments that gave us a takeaway. We'll put them in Pete's top hat. Letitia will pick one out. And then whomever the winner is, we'll let you know, we'll notify you, and we will send it to you. So make sure to check us out on Facebook. Where else can people find us, Pete?
teacherpeprally.com. And however you're listening to us, please subscribe, give us a review. Let's get the third season up and running. Let's connect and keep this conversation going.
Yeah, let's do that two-way communication. Let us know how we're doing. And Dr. Jannot, if someone doesn't win this great book, where can they find it to purchase? And then where else can they find you to connect with you?
Well, the book is available everywhere books are sold. There's also an audiobook and an ebook for people who prefer that. And all the information about me, my coaching, the book, all my social media places, it's all on my website, JeannineJannot.com.
Great. And I encourage everyone to check it out. She puts some really great tips on there, really good little newsletters and blogs. So again, thank you for being here, and we hope you have an amazing year. And
thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
You guys are great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, a few more will know what we're doing.